Okay, let me start the last panel of this conference, and this panel is about BDS phenomenon, BDS movement, and different aspects and dimensions of this phenomenon in the world. First of all, in Western Europe and the United States of America. We have two speakers, Alan Craig, the president of the European Association of Israel Studies, and the professor at the University of Leeds. And the second speaker is Corinne Blackmer from Southern Connecticut State University, USA. We also have a discussant from Israel, Professor Zeid Hani. We have two presentations, and then hopefully we'll have discussion. Maybe it will be a hot discussion. I hope so. The first presentation by Alan Craig. The title of the presentation, BDS as an Existential Threat, a study of Israeli securitization. Please, Alan.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for staying for this final session. It's always a relief to find that the conference is continuing in the fantastic vibrancy and enthusiasm that it started with. So that's a tribute to the organisers and everyone else involved. Okay, I'm talking about BDS. So those of us who are members of the Association of Israel Studies received an email a couple of moments ago from the president of the Association of Israel Studies, who clearly knew that I was about to speak about this, and quickly sent out an email letter to the State of Israel in support of a young woman who is currently being held by the Israeli authorities in Ben Gurion Airport. This is Laura Al-Qassam. Laura Al-Qassam is a prominent US BDS activist who will come in a moment to understand what that means. And she is being detained by the Israeli authorities under recently passed legislation that enables the state to prevent the entry of those people who are seen as supporters of BDS. Okay, to understand this, to understand the boycott, disinvestment, sanctions movement, to understand the response of all of us, of academia, but particularly of the Israeli state, do we need to know anything more than that the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement is extremely critical of the state of Israel, has what is clearly unfair criticisms to make, and we all should oppose it? Do we need to know anything more than this? Well, I would say yes, because as scholars and as students of Israel studies, we bring to the discussion an academic agenda. So, my talk today is BDS as an existential threat, a study in Israeli securitization. No, thank you. A study in Israeli securitization. Why? When I gave my keynote lecture at the beginning of this conference, we discussed what we understand Israel studies to be. and in what way it's different from Jewish studies. And one of the points I made was that Israel studies looks at Israel as a state and looks at the behaviour of the state of Israel in its exercise of sovereign power, not of Jewish power or Jewish communal relations, the behaviour of the state. And Israel studies as the behaviour of the state. So, and I also said that Israel can be taught in all sorts of ways, in all sorts of places. It can appear in all sorts of courses. So my own personal experience is someone who works in international politics and international relations. And within international politics and international relations, I have an interest in security studies. So, when I come to think about BDS, I think about BDS from the standpoint, looking at it from the perspective of international relations, international politics, and particularly security. So I'm not, when I'm doing this, teaching Israel studies as a course. I'm using Israel as a case study for research, and research that is of interest to a wider community of scholarship within international relations, international politics, and security. So, that's where I'm coming from. Where does that take me? That's the question. So, before we go very much further, we need to have a slightly more detailed understanding of the boycott, divestment, sanctions, the BDS movement, than the headline I gave you a few moments ago. So, to understand this, we need to understand the strategy of BDS. BDS is a strategy. And what does that mean? What does it mean? It means that BDS came from a call, specifically a call from a group of Palestinian non-governmental organisations in 2005, based in Ramallah on the West Bank. And this was a call, it was a conversation, it was a call from the Palestinian Society, Palestinian activists, to what we call civil society actors. This was not a call to states to treat Israel differently. This was a call directed to individuals and NGOs. This is an NGO movement, non-government organisation. And it's a transnational movement. It was a call to everyone who sympathised with the Palestinian position to do something. Not for their governments to do something, but for individuals and organisations to do something. And the framing of this was as a transnational social justice movement. And it was specifically framed, and the idea for this came from the understanding of the way in which people and small collections of people influenced the ending of the South African apartheid regime. Now, the extent and reason why the South African apartheid regime came to an end is a matter of much debate, but there was a part played in it by civil society local groups. And the call from these guys is that if you adopt the same sort of tactics as was adopted against South Africa, then we can bring about change. And the tactics that they propose are boycotting, divestment, and sanctions. Boycotting means not buying stuff, divestment means getting rid of the investments that you have in the business that you do, and sanctions means what we all understand sanctions to be. Now, so far so clear. The big point about the BDS call to action is that it is a call to end Israeli human rights abuse of Palestinians. It's a rights-based discourse. So BDS, as a narrative, is not about sanctions, it's not about divestments, and it's not about boycotts. What it's about is human rights for Palestinians, ending Israeli war crimes, stopping settler colonialism as an ongoing project, and ending Israeli apartheid. Now, the point about all of this is that it's shifting the debate. It's not a debate over a Palestinian state. It's not a one-state, two-state solution movement. BDS says it doesn't talk about that. It's not interested in that. It does not discuss a one-state, two-state, or what one might look like. What BDS talks about is human rights. Okay? So what does that mean? Does that mean BDS wants to end the Israeli state or end the occupation? Totally unclear. So it works for everyone. Anyone who's got a problem with Israeli treatment of Palestinians can sign up to BDS because they're not signing up to any particular solution. So it's a strategy and it's a narrative. Now, the question is this, and here's the point. I'm going to start off with it now. That the current director of the Israeli Foreign Ministry, Yuval Rotem, current director of the Israeli Foreign Ministry, who better to know about BDS and how to deal with it than the director of the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The director of the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs has said, continues to say, and recently said to Knesset committees, the state of Israel is overreacting to BDS. BDS is not, says the director of the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs, a strategic, existential threat to the state of Israel. It may be inconvenient on campuses, it may cause problems for academics, it may have problems with visiting celebrities, and so on and so forth. But BDS, says the head of the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs, is not an existential threat to the state. Studies of the impact of BDS show that the Israeli economy is in fantastic shape. The impact of BDS is marginal and will be marginal. You know, Israel is enormous on the world stage. BDS then is not statistically an existential threat. So why is it then, we ask, that the Israeli government has introduced such powerful legislation that we have this woman currently being held in Ben Gurion Airport and all the other things that are happening? So, we can ask that question in many ways. And the way in which I ask the question is to apply the scholarship that I use for my tools of understanding things that happen internationally. So, what's my theoretical framework? A lot of words going around in the discussion of BDS. One of the main ones is delegitimization. Israel is being delegitimized. What does that mean? Okay? This comes from international relations. So, let's look at these things. And why is it being treated as a security threat? An existential threat to the state? These are the questions. Okay, so the first tool that I bring in examining this is the idea of securitization. Securitization has grown out of the study of security. The study of security says, in critical security studies, which is where I'm taking this from, that there is more to security than things that happen on borders or weapons that are used against you. The understanding about security covers lots of different things. And one thing that happens when you talk about security, says critical security studies, is that people take you more seriously. The theoretical point is this, is that if an issue is linked to security, then people listen more intently. If it's accepted as a security threat, then a bigger budget becomes available, exceptional strategies are put in place. Security, runs the argument, takes an issue out of normal politics into the politics of security, where there's a lot more money available and there's a lot more excitement generated. And securitization is the theory that says that this is a linguistic process, it's a discursive process, it's talking about security, the use of security language itself brings about change. Clearly it's good example. Okay, so can we say that taking BDS and treating it as an existential security issue has brought about a change in the way that it's dealt with? All right, so look at the language maybe. We've got to bring more to it. If you're going to talk about delegitimization, you've got to talk about international legitimacy. Delegitimization and international legitimacy are linked. But nobody discusses international legitimacy because they jumped in the intellectual progression of the argument. Israel's international legitimacy, very simply, is viewed in Western Europe and in Israel as a liberal, democratic country that respects human rights. Israel is a liberal, democratic country that respects human rights. Therefore, Israel is one of us. Therefore, we're nice to Israel. Therefore, Israel is legitimate, and this is Israel's international legitimacy. Which is why people are getting concerned about what happens if you don't have international legitimacy. What happens if people start saying, hold on a minute, Israel isn't a liberal, democratic country that respects human rights? What impact does that actually have? Does it matter? Does anybody care? Okay? So the theoretical framework for my examination of BDS looks at security, international legitimacy, and delegitimization. And the reason I do this is because so do the powers that be in Israel. They also think like this. So, what do we take from this framework? We've got a hypothesis. It's always good to have a hypothesis. The hypothesis is that Israel, in common with other states, will act to defend its legitimacy. If it's understood, if the threat to the legitimacy is understood as an existential threat to the state. And I argue that's what's happening. So let's look at it a bit. This process of whether or not BDS is a security threat or not a security threat is political. We argue about it. Some people say yes, some people say no. So some people say this woman should be locked up, some people say they don't. It's political, we all have views. So I'm interested in the politics of Israel. Yeah? I teach Israeli politics. I like Israeli politics, it's exciting. So I'm interested in what's happening now, today, to this woman and why. So, going back to the director of the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs, says, is this a complete overreaction? Clearly nobody's taken any notice of the director of the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs. What does the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs say should be done about BDS? Clearly something should be done. So, in 2005, the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs came under enormous pressure from American pro-Israel organizations. And they said to the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs, look, you guys, you've got to do something. We're really struggling here in America. There is a growing criticism of Israel. You know, this is washing out from the Second Intifada, all sorts of stuff going on. We've got to do something better. You know, we in California, we know a lot about selling stuff and presenting stuff. And a group formed themselves in California, and there were endless meetings with people from the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And they brought into the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs a strategic approach that applies product branding initiatives to what they called country branding initiatives. And around about this time, they emerged the idea of country branding, so that forget about Ministry of Information and think about bringing in people from outside who really know how to sell stuff. So there was a team, and they launched in 2005 this idea of Brand Israel. And Brand Israel was stressed the high tech, it stressed all the things that we like about Israel, the success, the weather, the tourism, the history, the beaches, and so on and so forth. Now, there was a very interesting debate, and here's the debate, and this is why it's relevant. What the branding people were telling the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs is, will you stop mentioning the Palestinians? Just stop mentioning conflict. Stop saying that you are suffering from Palestinian terrorism, because it's a bad message. People aren't buying it. Just don't mention it. But the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs said, well, hold on a minute. We're the good guys. Surely it's a good message to say that Palestinians are coming into our restaurants and blowing us up. Isn't that a good message? The branding people say, it's still a bad message. You know, just talk about the weather, talk about, you don't, it's not oranges anymore, so talk about high-tech and biotech. These are the new oranges. High-tech, biotech, and the new oranges. I just thought of that. Okay. And this was adopted. And then Dan Sino wrote a book called
Startup Nation.
Startup Nation, absolutely, Startup Nation. And they added that to the message. So Israel then becomes not just oranges, forget oranges, weather, beaches, biotech, high-tech, startup nation. And Israel is then branded as Startup Nation, which is great. But unfortunately, the exact moment that they brand Israel as Startup Nation, Israel engages with the 2008 war in Gaza, so there's 24-hour coverage of Israeli bombardment of Gaza, while the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs is talking about Startup Nation and the New Oranges. So it doesn't really work. But they continue with this, and that's still the position of the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Better explanation, forget about looking at people in airports. And indeed, there are a number of NGOs, particularly pro-Israel NGOs, Rabbis for Justice, etc., saying, you don't ban us from Israel. We don't like the settlements, but we like you. This is a bad message. So this is what I call, and what would be called, a process of desecuritization. BDS is not a security threat, these guys say, it's desecuritization. So don't think of it as security, don't apply all these resources. My framework would then say this is a desecuritized issue. But that's not what happens. And the reason that's not what happens is that there is much more powerful voices that talk about the securitization of BDS. And the securitization of BDS comes with the linking of BDS not to sanctions, not to divestment, not to boycotts. Now, we can deal with it. BDS is linked to delegitimization. Where did that suddenly come from? Delegitimization comes actually from the army. There's a one. Why does it come from the army? Well, this is the interesting thing. So, let's back that up. 2015, Chief of the General Staff, Gadi Eisenkot, Chief of the General Staff of the State of Israel, publishes for the first time the Israeli Ministry Strategy document. There are loads of strategy documents year in, year out, but he publishes this, not in full, but enough. And in this strategy document, it's all about legitimation and delegitimation. Delegitimization. Why? Why would the IDF be talking about how Israel is perceived as a liberal democratic country, blah, blah, blah. But, here's the point. It's the view of the military that the threat to Israel comes from the understanding of Israel as not being a democratic, liberal, human rights respecting nice state. The threat to Israel comes if it's generally understood that Israel is an aggressor state that commits war crimes. And this, says the IDF, impacts very severely through the organisations internationally on the ability of the Israeli military to defend the state. Why should these opinions impact on the military? Well, think back to 2008, which is when this thinking started. CAS-led in 2008 resulted in the Goldstone report, resulted in enormous condemnation internationally, resulted in condemnation in the UN. That was repeated in 2010 with the flotilla. It was repeated in 2012 with the further war in Gaza. It was repeated in 2014 with the war in Gaza. The Israeli military has come to the conclusion that if Israel is understood in this way, they can't operate the way they want to operate. Why? Why should an understanding mean that the military can't operate? And here's the point, and this is where it fits to BDS. If Israel is understood as being the bad guy, in very basic terms, then the standard of behaviour that is applied to the Israeli state is different from the standard of behaviour that is applied elsewhere. Israel is being threatened with taken to the International Criminal Court. Israel is being condemned in the International Court of Justice. Israel is being investigated by NGOs left, right and centre. Israel is being held, and I think they're right about this, to a higher standard than other states. So the military start talking about this. And it's then seen as a security threat. And at the Herzliya conference in 2010, 2011, 2012, there are more and more panels of experts speaking and saying that delegitimization is a threat to the state and what are we going to do about it? And what then happens is that BDS is linked to delegitimization, because BDS is a mouthpiece and a vehicle for this process. What then happens in 2014 is that the talks between the Israelis and the Palestinians that are sponsored by John Kerry fall apart. There's another war in Gaza, and the Palestinian Authority, it doesn't support BDS. Palestinian Authority does not support BDS, but the Palestinian Authority signs up to the International Criminal Court. So again, there is more pressure available to be brought to bear on the military. Meanwhile, everybody else starts to get a bit concerned, because what grabs everybody else in the street is the fact that the Palestinian Authority has been campaigning for Israel to be kicked out of the Champions League, and people can't watch Israel take place in European football. Why should Israel be kicked out of the Champions League? Well, the argument runs that the Israeli Football League includes settlement teams, and the regulations of FIFA are clear. FIFA says you cannot have teams from somebody else's country playing in your league. Technical, but pretty impressive. You can't have teams from somebody else's country playing in your league. So if you recognise Palestine, or certainly if you recognise that the settlement teams are beyond the borders of the state, you can't have them in your league. So, of course, the Palestinian Authority, headed by the former leader of the Palestinian Security Services, incidentally, he was now head of the Palestinian Football Association, they go to FIFA. What does Israel do? Israel instructs, through its Ministry of Foreign Affairs, every single one of its embassies to campaign with the local football associations to bring pressure to bear on FIFA. Well, luckily for everyone concerned, FIFA is probably one of the most corrupt organisations around, and really it wasn't in its interest to get involved in this at all, so eventually they decided not to decide, but not before the whole of the Israeli public, they didn't that bothered about academics coming here, there or everywhere, or whether or not Ariel's going to be accepted, blah, blah, blah. But what they really don't like is not being able to watch the football, so wow. All of this is happening at the same time as the military are talking about going to the International Criminal Court, and Netanyahu wins the election in 2015. And what does he do when he comes in? He, in order to satisfy himself and the right wing of his cabinet, he takes away from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs the responsibility for dealing with BDS and gives it to the Internal Security Ministry. Just think about that. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs has got all this branding Israel stuff, blah, 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 and all these ministries. Lose all of this. It's now gone to the Ministry of Security, and the Ministry of Security, together with the Internal Affairs Ministry, have got control. Meanwhile, Israel's main newspaper has a Stop BDS big campaign conference, first of its type. Everybody in government comes along and speaks, and they all say that BDS is an existential threat. So this narrative that BDS is an existential threat means that it's a security thing, which means that it's got a budget, which means that it's going to the security ministry, which means that they are now empowered to come to the cabinet, to come to the Knesset with some really meaty ideas, none of this branding Israel stuff. So, in many ways, 2015, 2016 is the year of BDS hysteria, or more appropriately, the year of BDS securitization. And what happens? Transfer of responsibility from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Foreign Ministry, to the Security Ministry. It now becomes the idea of Gilad Erdan. Gilad Erdan, about 6 months ago, went to the INSS, very influential security conference in Israel, and said, and made a speech, you can see it on YouTube. He says, Israel no longer has any existential threats on its borders. Israel, says Erdogan, is now in the position where it can defeat easily any of its regional enemies. There's only 2 remaining existential threats, says Erdogan. One is BDS and delegitimization, and the other is lone wolf terrorism. Any of these? Lone wolf terrorism. Yeah? The latest idea of self-starting terrorism. All the rest of the stuff, forget about. BDS is Israel's existential threat, says Gilad Erdan. So what happens is within Israel, we've got the demonization of the left-wing NGOs. They are seen as supporters of BDS. BDS is a foreign thing. But Gilad Erdan says no. BDS is an existential threat within the state. Why is it an existential threat within the state when you've got all this stuff going on outside, just keep it beyond the borders? The argument then goes is that BDS is a threat to Israel's home front. BDS is a threat to Israel's home front. Israel's home front has become very important since 2006. 2006, we had the Second War in Lebanon. We had missiles coming in. The war was fought in 2006 to stop missiles coming in. On the last day of the war, they were still coming in. Now there are thousands of missiles on the borders of Israel, and much more, much better missiles. So the military planners in Israel say in the next war, and we're now between wars, this is Israeli thinking, in the next war, there will be missiles that will impact on civilian areas. How will Israel respond to this is the issue for the home front. That's why the home front is now very, very important. What's it going to do with BDS? Why is BDS a threat to the home front? Here's the argument that Erdogan made at the security conference a few months ago. if Israelis buy into BDS and think we are an apartheid country, we are an oppressor, we are committers of war crimes, then they're not going to make the sacrifices necessary to be resilient and put up rockets, and the home front will be weakened. So the fight against BDS is taking place both outside Israel and inside Israel. And the amendment, so what we then have now is the passing of the amendment to the entry law. And there are, according to open source documents, a list of over 20 organisations that the Israeli state wouldn't allow the leaders of them into the country anyway. And it's working with the security services to create lists, it's working with the internal security people, and it's working with those in charge of the entry into the country, internal affairs. So, you know, it's a big thing that's happened. So, what I say is this, is that BDS is being treated by the Israeli state in a way that's totally divorced of what's going on in academia or so on and so forth. It's being treated as an existential threat to the state. It's an example of a successful securitization of an issue that could have been dealt with differently. And the hypothesis that a state who sees its international legitimacy threatened will at some point snap and react aggressively seems to be borne out by this. So what I've tried to do here is I've tried to bring to the table tools from academic study outside strict Israeli studies tools and apply them to the current circumstances to give us a better understanding. There are other ways of looking at this. You could look at this from BDS as a threat to Israeli identity, which is essentially what it is. But viewed in international relations terms and security terms, there are a couple of other tools to bring to the table. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. The second presentation by Professor Blackmer, BDS Washington's allegations against Israel and American case. Corinne, please.
All right. Since Alan has done such a good job of explaining what BDS is, I don't have to go through that. I can just say that before I get into the meat of my presentation, I want to make a few introductory remarks. One is I have being published will be out in mid-2019, a book called Queering Anti-Zionism, which is about how major intellectuals in the United States who happen to be gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender have come out in support of BDS, including such notable figures as Judith Butler, Sarah Schulman, Angela Davis. And so my book is a critique of them. My second point I'd like to open with before getting into the meat of my presentation is the status of gay and lesbian rights in the Western world. And it has become clear to me, as it has to others, that how you treat gays and lesbians has now become a sort of a merit badge, an indicator of how civilized you are across the board. It has become a very important issue in Western Europe, the United States, Canada, and other countries. So your civilizational index is measured according to how you treat LGBT people. In the United States, the support for LGBT rights amongst younger people is currently, I'm just looking at the Pew Research Center report, which is the most accurate. They do huge analysis. Among millennials, 75% agree that gays and lesbians should have the right to marry, which is a major indicator of your acceptance of gays and lesbians across the board. Only 23% disagree with that statement. That Americans don't, 74% of Americans don't agree about anything. but they do agree that gays and lesbians should be allowed to marry. The numbers go down as you get older in the population, but essentially these numbers mean that as a function of time, gays and lesbians will be thoroughly integrated into the population of the United States. If this is true of the United States, it's true of Western Europe, it is true on steroids in Israel. Israel began its movement toward LGBT rights very early. Knesset formally repealed a statute that it inherited. It was called the Buggery Statute in 1988. It then banned workplace discrimination in 1992, legalized open military service in 1993, provided same-sex domestic partnership benefits in 1995, legal change of names in 1995, it reduced the age of consent from 18 to 16 in 2004, secured inheritance rights in 2004, the same year that Knesset approved anti-hate crime legislation for gay people. It legalized adoption in 2005, recognized civil unions performed abroad in 2008, civil divorce in 2012, and surrogacy, overseas surrogacy, but not domestic surrogacy, which is a big issue in Israel right now, in 2013. Transgender surgery is covered under national health insurance law, and there are laws currently under consideration, although still contested, to eliminate gender markers in national identity cards. That is how far gay and lesbian rights have come in Israel. So Israel is sort of the high watermark of gay and lesbian rights in the Western world, everywhere from Israel all the way through, now also including South America, or many parts of South America. So what do you do with such a record? Well, one thing we can do is we can contrast it, because the contrast would become obvious with what is life like for gays and lesbians outside of Israel and its neighborhood in the Middle East. Well, in the Middle East, the situation is dire. On the juridical level, same-sex relations are illegal and punishable by imprisonment in Egypt, 17 years with hard labor, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, and Syria, punishable by death in Iran, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates. In Yemen and Gaza, the punishment varies between death and imprisonment. The West Bank, Lebanon, and Jordan have decriminalized same-sex relations, but discrimination, disinheritance, shunning, assault, harassment, and honor killings are common. So that is the contrast against which Israel operates. So now I want to come back down to what do you do if you think that Israel, as Alan has pointed out, is an anti-democratic, basically violator of human rights? What do you do with this contrast between how LGBT rights have become the watermark, the gold standard for respect for human rights throughout the civilized world, versus the desire to delegitimize Israel? The answer to that question is you accuse Israel of something called pinkwashing. Well, what is pinkwashing? Pinkwashing comes from the 17th century verb to whitewash, which is basically to accuse, to cover up legitimate accusations for something and to delegitimize it that way. So, as applies to the anti-Israel movement, the term pinkwashing started out as a non-vocabulary term in 2010, and it originally came from greenwashing. There's various forms of washings that have come into existence. One of them, Alan and I were discussing this one, we invented, I think, but I'm sure will gain currency now, tech washing, whereby you critique Israel for its high technology. And high technology becomes a way, instead of talking about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and how awful Israelis are to Palestinians, you talk about tech instead. And talking about tech instead is not really about technology, it's about hiding your mistreatment of Palestinians. That's tech washing. Greenwashing is using Israel's very admirable record in environmental policy as a way of not talking about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and Israel's violation of Palestinian human rights. Now, the idea behind whitewashing is that it's a pretense, it's false. The problem with pinkwashing is when this is applied to LGBT people. And so the idea here is that you don't really support LGBT rights, you only appear to support LGBT rights, or LGBT rights in Israel is just a front for your abuse of Palestinian human rights. And so that's what pinkwashing is. And it is in the United States because of the enormous importance and cachet surrounding the LGBT rights movement in the United States, almost has become the major vehicle for critiquing Israel through these major intellectuals. You basically take these there's brown washing where you use Israel's record with advocacy of people of color, and that's really a front for how you mistreat Palestinians. But the problem with the pinkwashing is that Israel really does have a very sterling record, as I pointed out, with LGBT rights. How this operates also is to conflate LGBT rights and the people who have argued for it successfully in Israel, dating all the way back to the 1980s, with their government. And that is done through attaching LGBT rights to the Brand Israel campaign, which Alan was discussing. The problem with doing that is that gay and lesbian rights in Israel, most gays and lesbians in Israel are leftists, and they have nothing to do with the government. And they have fought long and hard, usually against entrenched Orthodox and Haredi opposition, to gain rights. The courts have been very friendly. Tel Aviv is a very gay-friendly city. And so, but the BDS people have tried to portray all of this as nothing but falsehood. And this goes back to a very anti-Semitic canard, that there's nothing that Jews can do because the purpose is always to manipulate or conceal or divert attention away from or to distort the evil that appears in all Jewish actions and inaction. Everything the Jewish nation does is part of a grand conspiratorial plan. Now, in mentioning BDS, I was very interested in what Alan had to say because, in my opinion, BDS is a problem for the diaspora, not a problem for Israel itself. The delegitimization of Israel as a place that disrespects Palestinian human rights is a problem in my country. It's a major argument, and you're always confronted with this argument. I no longer, for example, personally feel welcome in women's studies because women's studies recently signed on to a BDS agenda in the United States, and they have written into the National Women's Studies Organization this BDS language. Asian American American Association has done it. American Studies Association has done it. Although they've been taken to court now for violating, there's a woman named Jasper Puar, who's a really an unfortunate individual, very much an extremist, who's been taken to court. So there's a major pushback against BDS. But in the meantime, so I just want to indicate this sort of strange divide between LGBT rights being the watermark now for if you're civilized, you give LGBT people their rights. That means you're civilized. If you don't, you're not. Versus this effort to delegitimize Israel by saying, well, you give LGBT people their rights, but you're really not doing so. You're just it's a front. First of all, you're actually homophobic, And secondly, you're just diverting attention away from your mistreatment of Palestinians. Thank you.
What now? We'll have a hot discussion. Discussion, please.
Okay, it's my pleasure to address your papers, colleagues. I really hesitate what I should do, whether to discuss what you said or give my own paper on the topic. I will try to do both, if you don't mind. Yeah, thank you so much. So first of all, I would say that it is important that we are talking about this now, not just in the context of the contemporary Israeli politics, but also in the context of history. Meaning the so-called round events that we had last year and this year, 50 years of the Six-Day War, the 70 years of the State of Israel, as a Balfour Declaration, a Bolshevik Revolution Declaration, and so on and so forth. We probably missed another important event. That means 80 years of the Evian Conference, which gathered in Evian in 1938 in order for the first time to discuss the question of boycotting future Jewish state. From this point of view, we might tell that the BDS is just another reincarnation of the same trend. How to do what was necessary to do for the so-called Red-Green Alliance, the combination of the communist and Islamist movements, states and forces and subjects, in order not to permit to the Jewish state to exist, and if they will be successful, not to permit to the Jewish people to exist. Because from this point of view, we might say that it's continuation of the same trend of religious anti-Semitism, of the racial, of the Middle Ages, of religious racist anti-Semitism of the modern times, and so on and so forth. Dismissing Jewish people to live in their own nation state means just another aspect of dismissing their right to exist in general. From this we come back to how it happened now. And I totally agree with both of you, colleagues, that in principle it's a realization, the BDS movement, of two things, operative policies and Israeli reactions. Alan, I would question your point, not because I totally disagree with that, but we have to think, for example, I'm coming back to your permission to say I was there. So I was there twice. First I was there when the Israeli media and government discussed who should be entrusted to fight with the BDS movement, and it happened to be, it was moved to the Ministry of Strategic Affairs. Ministry of Strategic Affairs is a ministry that was entrusted by Prime Minister to do all special tasks, starting from the Iranian nuclear threat and finishing with the propaganda and ecological threats here. And then it was given to first available minister, which happened to be Gilad Erdan. So it might have, but to my mind, might have nothing to do with this function as the Minister of Domestic Affairs, or the domestic security. Of course, he might, as a human being, from time to time confuse between two missions. But it's not necessarily, I'm not sure that it was given to him due to the fact that fighting the BDS is regarded by the government as an internal security issue. My own experience, that's the second time I was there, yeah? As a chief scientist of the Israeli Ministry of Aliyah Integration, I'm a member of so-called the Forum of Israeli Forum of Chief Scientists. That is advisory board to Israeli government in concern of development of policy of development of science and technology. One day we were sitting in the Ministry of Science, Technology and Space, the name of the ministry, And the coordinator of our forum, Director General of that ministry, we discussing the issue of scientific and technological cooperation with various countries of the world. And I asked him questions, what about BDS? What about how it will affect our cooperation agreements, our agreement with Germany, our agreement with England, our cooperation agreement with the United States. We discussed the possibility of establishment the same body that will coordinate cooperation with Russia, with Ukraine, and so on and so forth. He looked at me sadly and said, listen, that's foreign minister. Let's talk about business. Don't confuse me. He said it in Hebrew, you know. Don't, how you would say? I'm not sure there is an English equivalent.
Don't mix me up.
Yeah, but it's not so strong as in Hebrew. Okay, simply just let's talk short. Talk about that in your whatever with your friends. From this point of view, of course it's the issue of personal approach of this or that ministry. How important he is going to take it into consideration. I remember our talk with the Israeli Defense Minister, Avigdor Lieberman. He told me a wonderful story about his meeting with his Austrian counterpart. When his Austrian counterpart gave him his business card, it was written, Ministry of Sport and Defense. So I asked him, Avigdor tells me, I asked him, does it mean that all the soldiers are sportsmen, or all the Austrian sportsmen are soldiers? He said, no. It's just a question of additional job. Everybody in our country wants to deal with sport. Nobody's interested in defense. So I had to take it. I would take this story into consideration while thinking in what way the personality plays a role. On the other hand, I do agree that the personality plays the role while we are talking about the heritage of Mr. Shimon Peres in the foreign ministry. When this story, now as we know it as a BDS, started not today. It started at the late days of Oslo peace process, or as many Israelis believe, rest in peace process. And many people came to Shimon Peres, at that time foreign minister, and later on prime minister of the state of Israel, and then again minister of foreign affairs and minister of regional development, responsible for the peace process in the Middle East, and asked him why we're not doing anything. Why shouldn't we imply more resources to our fight with the delegitimization of Israel? Giving the same concept like the story you told us about NGO activists in California, why Israeli government is not doing anything. Said, okay, that's, and then they told the phrase which took aback all those who were born and brought up in the Soviet Union. They said, since we are going closer to peace, since we are going as closer as we go to our aim, which is peace, the more fight from the side of the enemies of peace we will experience. You know, just casualties of peace. Anti-Israeli movement is just casualties. Forget it. The more the deeds is the better propaganda than the words. So we should not imply anything in that. And it's understandable. You cannot tell that your partner, peace partner, is a criminal, terrorist, supporter of terrorists, and you cannot tell him that he is a gangster and a corrupt politician, since you're going to sign a peace agreement with him. You know, if you want him anyway, you should make an effort to legitimize him, not to delegitimize him. So nowadays we are in a different situation. We understand, probably Israeli government understands what both of you colleagues told now, and they're trying to think what will be better to do from this point of view. First of all, it would be really good, as Alan and both colleagues presented, what is the nature of the BDS movement. Probably there is an understanding in the most of the circles of Israeli decision makers and Israeli NGOs that are active in this field, that this is actually not about the shortcomings of the Israeli policies, and not about Israeli policies in general. That's not about the human rights in Israel. That's not about the essence of Israel as a Jewish state. That's not about Israeli borders. That's not about Israeli policies. That's about the existence of Israel. Would it be differently? Would we remove the Jewish character of the state? We'll limit our territory with Tel Aviv, northern Tel Aviv, and declare all the population of Israel gays and lesbians. That would not help. That would not help at all. Still, they will find a way to say that Israel is not liberal enough, not democratic enough, not have enough rights to exist, and they will find something else. So from this point of view, there is nothing very much to do but to continue the story of explaining the role Israel plays for the modern economy, for the modern society, for the human rights of the whole world, how effective it could be to cooperate with Israel rather than just to be silent or silently or non-silently to join those who are legitimizing the state of Israel. Next point, I would say, which doesn't help us to fight BDS, is the fact that the BDS failed, in fact, as Alan presented himself. In fact, BDS wasn't successful in no element of was successful in no aspect of these activities. Diplomatic intifada failed. All these attempts to apply, to approach to international organizations in order to arrange campaigns against Israel, they're successful in their odious institutions like International Council, UN Council of Human Rights, the government and organized but so peace-loving and human rights-loving countries as Saudi Arabia, Syria, Northern Sudan, and so on and so forth. No real person, besides those who would like Israel not to exist, are not taking this seriously. No real person taking seriously the issue, the declarations in the UNESCO proclaiming that Jewish people has nothing to do with the heritage of the Temple Mount of Jerusalem. You know, you can say time and again, which will not help. You know, in principle, meantime, I agree with you. Meantime, it didn't work. Less and less people are buying this manipulation with their world public opinion, like all these flotillas of freedom sent to Gaza, all these staged clashes on the defensive fence, and so on and so forth. Yeah, it is publicized on TV, it makes bad impression. In practical terms, does it work? I really don't know. BDS failed in terms of, as you put it correctly, absolutely correctly, BDS failed in terms of boycotting Israel economically. The recent study, just before coming to this conference, I read a report of one of the Israeli financial advising companies that was entrusted in 2010 to check the effectiveness of the economic boycott at the part of the BDS movement on Israeli companies. The conclusion is that, and actually they questioned a few hundreds of Israeli and few thousand of international executive officers. It was huge research. How many of them actually were damaged of the Israeli, of the BDS initiated boycotts of Israeli products, of cooperation of various companies with the Israeli counterparts, and so on and so forth. Guess how many? 0.75. That's less than 1%. And this less than 1% reported less than 10% damage. Their turnover, even this less than 1%. And it was also timed, because most of this damage was in a few months of operation, no, how we call it? In Hebrew we call it protective shell. How we call it? Okay, recent guard operation in 2014.
Protective
Yeah, exactly, that's the point. Okay, so from this point of view, it failed. It failed, we understand why it failed, yes. We understand it because of the Israeli business, because of the Israeli trade, is business-to-business programs, because of the fact that the real practical interests of markets to cooperate with Israel and not to boycott Israel, because Israel is it is a startup nation. Because many of the countries of the world, they're interested to cooperate, to get Israeli technology, and so on and so forth. Where BDS movement is successful? The BDS movement is successful in the human rights movement, or what is declared to be the human rights movement, in the situation when it is not, probably. And the BDS movement is successful in university campuses. That's really a problem. Even there, it is not so hard-lined, it is not so obvious, it is not so clear as it used to be in a couple of years, 2 or 3 years before. But still, it is very important and very dangerous. On one hand, we do understand, or many reasonable people understand, that in fact the BDS movement, even there, in these international organizations, in these angles of the Red-Green Alliance, where the red, that means former communist countries, are substituted with their this leftist and radical liberal, with the quotation marks or without quotation marks, circles in Canada, United States, and especially in Western Europe. But many understand that in fact this BDS movement is now more and more at a sort of anti-intellectual and tendentious and marginal totalitarian program, totalitarian trend, which are brainwashing. They use the abstractions, tendentious manipulating of the public opinion and information, racist discrimination, what else? Physical and intellectual violence, and pressing any opposite opinions. So that means using the same method as they proclaim, as they declare Israel is using, which is in fact not, but okay, they say that. But by saying that they're using the same methods in order to stop their opponents from telling the opposite opinion, whether it's true or not. And that is why the university establishment in many of the Western countries, they're against BDS. Not because they're so Israel-loving, not because they're Jewish, but in fact they understand that many of these people that are involved in the BDS movement, they're not really researchers. They're so-called academic activists. Many of them, as both of you said, many of them didn't publish a single word, a single article for many years. What they do, they participate in various anti-Israeli conferences, in various meetings, in writing proclamations, in fighting or trying to undermine Israeli conferences, or conferences devoted to Israel, or concerts of Israeli artists, and so on and so forth. So, to make a long story short, what does it mean? Just to conclude, what does it mean? Do I think that it's not BDS is not a threat? No, I don't think so. I think it's a huge threat. Don't I think that BDS is not an existential threat? I do think that BDS is an existential threat. But I think that it's an existential threat not now, and maybe not in the next years. I think that existential threat that Israel will face in 10 years or in 20 years, when the current generation of students of American, West European, Canadian, East European, Asian, less than in the Western world. They will become decision makers. So the current struggle with the BDS is a struggle for the next generation. Just for 1 second, coming to the country we are staying in at the moment, yeah, to this country, as an example of new old democracies of the Eastern Europe, whether they will fall in this trend, anti-Zionist trend and so on, including the academia, represented by the young guys sitting here, or not. I had a discussion after the Revolution of Dignity with Yosef Zissels, current local Jewish leader, and asked him, Yosef, tell me please, Ukraine wants to be a part of Europe, wants to be a European country. Does it also mean that together with all other values, it is going to adopt anti-Zionism? He said, looked at me and said, I very much hope that anti-Zionism would be the last European value Ukraine will adopt. Let's hope for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, first of all, the reply from Alan and Corinne, and then questions from the audience. So, please,
Thank you for your paper. It was very interesting.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that BDS is a threat in terms of the decision-making powers of the next generation, particularly since it's very powerful from my country and from my perspective on American campuses. Judith Butler is the major intellectual in humanities in the United States. And she is a BDSer, so that's a big problem. Having said that, BDS only has influence in the humanities. People in the social sciences and the hard sciences have absolutely no interest in BDS in the United States. They're too busy making economic, political, and scientific reports and cooperative agreements with the Israelis.
the questions. Professor Rocky.
Well, thank you. It was extremely instructive. First of all, it was what you said in the end was very important. You said that many scholars, instead of scholarly activity, move into the activist mode. And we could see in that session that we moved from the academic mode to the very activist mode. So I think that that transition is a bit dangerous for any scholarly discipline, particularly for Israel studies, because it is easily politicized. And I think what is admirable about Alan's talk is that he didn't commit this sin without taking any position whatsoever on whether BDS is good or bad. This is something unthinkable for you because you are an activist and you're legitimate to be an activist. The question is, what is the place of that except the object of study?
Not in the classroom. Yeah. Not in the classroom.
I didn't interrupt you if I remember.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I know, this is really custom, but it's not. So I'm saying that it's very important to understand this shift that we have just observed. Now, to the content of that, I have a couple of questions. One, your Zev's argument that whatever Israel does, say, gives rights to North Tel Aviv homosexuals, and it reminds me of a very old Jewish attitude, saying that, the pre-modern argument that Esav sonnet Yaakov, that the non-Jews hate Jews, whatever they do. They can be nice, they can be less nice, but the nature of hatred is irrational, and therefore, whatever we do doesn't really matter. So this is a very interesting trait of Israeli political culture, which is in fact Jewish, and that's a good intersection of Jewish studies with Israel studies, because usually they're disjoint, but here I think a very interesting connection can be made. And finally, I would like to, myself, to formulate a hypothesis, and would like to hear if this hypothesis makes sense. There is another very useful function of BDS. It's the function of mobilization. You see, if the Minister of Strategic Affairs says we are not threatened by our environment, we are not threatened by any country or collection of countries, we are threatened by BDS, as Netanyahu said several times, that creates a sense of being assailed, besieged, and that helps mobilization in Israel. Even more, it helps mobilization of Israel advocates outside of Israel, because they need a threat to defend Israel. If there's no threat, there's nothing to defend. And, ironically, it's also a mobilization tool for those who criticize Israel, because BDS is a very useful tool for mobilization support for criticism of Israel. So it's a very interesting mobilizing tool, and I wonder if this hypothesis makes sense, according to you.
The mobilization point is very interesting. There was, in the early 2000s, I can't remember the exact date, it might have been 2004, thereabouts. There was a very nasty fire that took place in the forest in Carmel. Yeah, it's a big forest fire. And this forest fire, there have been several since, but this forest fire was unusual. And it spread very rapidly, and it was approaching Haifa. It was a big thing. And eventually it was brought under control. And what happened was that, of course, there was a lot of criticism, and there was a criticism of the fire authorities, because the fire authorities had not been able to deal with this. And the fire authorities said, well, hold on a minute, year in, year out, we ask for resources, and you give them elsewhere. You've starved us of resources. Okay. It went a little bit quiet. Next thing that happened is that someone from the fire authority said, you know, just up there is the Lebanon border. If next time they send rockets over, they put incendiary devices on the front of the rockets, then it will produce a fire, and then we'll have a real problem. And what we need are more resources to be able to defend the state against Hezbollah and stop the fire. So what then happened was, in accordance with your mobilization theory, absolutely right, the budget of the fire authority in the area was increased several times, and there's now no longer problem about the number of the amount of equipment. So this is a little bit of the sort of framework of my thinking, which is to demonstrate this idea of mobilization is linked to this idea of securitization. But it has to be accepted, and it's a political process. And in Israel, security is the most important thing. So if BDS is a security threat, then there's lots of resources. Okay, so I mean, I agree with the mobilization point in time.
A response from Professor Blackmer.
Yes, let's put it this way. For a long time, Israel has been one of the favorite vacation designations of LGBT people worldwide. That remains the case. What the BDS movement is attempting to do is to pull gays and lesbians out of Israel, get their tourist dollars out of there and legitimation, and to mobilize in the gay and lesbian community in the United States, which is the most I'm familiar with, anti-Israel feeling, to pull them away. Mm-hmm. And it is a great mobilization tool because you don't have to worry, or in my opinion, it's a deflection tool. You don't have to worry about the major human rights abuses going on in the world. You don't talk about Tibet, you don't talk about Kashmir, you don't talk about all these other places. You focus on Israel. And it's a small, vulnerable, imperfect, democratic nation. And it's an easy target. And I think that anti-Semitism does in fact play a role that's fairly important in BDS discourse. And that is that Jews cannot by definition do right.
Okay, can I just add a point to that? Because the other point that we made about about the idea of anti-Semitism as a tool for understanding the place in the world. It's exactly right. The first responses to BDS were almost entirely framed as anti-Semitism. What we find now a little bit with this idea of delegitimization and so on and so forth is anti-Semitism as a framework for understanding what's going on is retreated. Anti-Semitism, framing everything as anti-Semitism is a very dangerous viewpoint. It denies, in academic terms, it denies agency. It means it's disempowering. We have no power to bring about change. In fact, we cannot influence our enemies in any way. It is diaspora thinking. It is diaspora thinking. It is the powerless minority thinking expressed by the most powerful state in the Middle East with the biggest army and the greatest technical achievements, who are in competition and say that we're the biggest victim in the Middle East because we're the subject of anti-Semitism, we can't do anything about it, there's no point in changing because it won't make any difference. Now, going back to my delegitimization model, the people who write about international legitimacy talk about there comes a time when there is a crisis of legitimization, a crisis of international legitimacy. A state becomes a prior state. A state becomes something like Libya. Who was going to stand up to defend Gaddafi against international intervention? Nobody. He's by himself. And this is a process of delegitimization. You've got North Korea. Luckily for North Korea, it is very legitimate in the eyes of the Chinese. No one else, but in the eyes of the Chinese, so they're okay. But when a crisis...
And Trump.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Anyway, so when the argument goes is that there comes a time when a state has to change. If a state is going to survive, a state at some point has to bring about societal change. Yeah? And in Israel, to actually change in any way, as an ethno-nationalist state in the process of becoming less liberal rather than more liberal is not going to happen anytime soon. So what is left in the tools available for policy? Well, we've got a tool of anti-Semitism that says we don't have to do anything because it won't make a difference. And we've got a tool of delegitimizing the delegitimizers. In other words, we take those people that have these criticisms, whether they're justified or not, and we attack them. And that's what's going on at the moment. And the reason why that's going on at the moment is there's no room for change. You may say they'll hate us anyway, but that's not a reason not to change.
In which direction?
In the direction of being more liberal, not less liberal, perhaps.
It's very hard for me to understand in what way being national, ethnic national, or being the state based on the idea of ethnic nationalism rather than civic nationalism contradicts with the liberal values. But that's another discussion. I would like to,
I'd like to hear more from the audience.
Yes.
I would like to respond to what Jakob said.
Well, can we take some more questions and respond all at the same time?
Still, it will be forgotten in the public questions, So I would like to answer this question. First of all, to apologize for interrupting you. Second, one of my colleagues in Bar-Ilan once said a very important thing. He said, okay, there is a trend, there is a phenomenon that social scientists, political scientists, despite what he or she is learning and studying and researching, in some way, at some point, has a positive response to their subject matter. Even those who are learning German fascism, they are ready to say that it could be, he starts to understand, not to explain, not to legitimize, but to understand why the leaders of the Third Reich did this and that. And there are only two subject matters in the world that researchers hate the subject matter: Soviet studies and Israel studies. So you have a lot of, we're not talking about ourselves, of course, yeah? We're having a lot of scholars of Israel, they're doing politics, what could be done here. So the good question is whether it's possible, whether it's legitimate or not, whether to follow this game and to say, since our ideological enemy is doing that, we should do the same or not. If you will take as an example research of our colleague Alec Epstein, who a few years ago, he did a research what Israeli scholars dealing with Israel studies, what they're researching. And it turned out that 92% of papers presented in international conferences, articles published in reference journals, books that were published by Israeli scholars, and so on and so forth, they have nothing to do, or very little, if anything, to do with their subjects that Israel is unique and has a special importance for the state of Israel. They are researching ethnic relations in Fiji, status of Bedouin women, with all respect to this subject, yeah? And only N% has anything to do with the Israel itself, yeah? And by myself, I came across with this story when I'm looking for material about the settlement movement in Judea, Samaria, and other. And realized there is nothing much about that, and even nothing about that, scholarly. And when I asked one of very important and solid colleague in the university, Hebrew University, why that happened, he said that is why, when that happens due to the fact that we are not interested in researching of the settlement movement. We simply want them not to be there. That's the story. So coming back to the question whether we can use the classroom or the place in the academic conference in order to fight our enemies, my understanding is no. If my students in the middle of semester taking my course in Israeli government and politics understand which party I'm going to vote or what is my stand in Arab-Israeli conflict, I failed as a lecturer. It happened once in my academic career, but because most of my students in the classroom were Russian speakers, and they hear me on Israeli-Russian TV as a political commentator. But that was the reason. Sorry.
Okay, 5 minutes remain, so we have time for 1 or 2 questions more. Please.
I have a question to Professor Craig. As you know, the BDS movement simply doesn't exist in our part of Europe, and as I see in Western media, absolute majority of BDS supporters are representatives of academic circles of English-speaking countries. And is BDS movement noticeably widespread in continental Europe, especially in German-speaking countries and France? Is it possible to observe further widespreading of BDS movement among academic circles in continental Europe?
Okay, should we take some more questions? Can you
Okay,
give us
let's have some questions, please.
So I have a few points to, few remarks, not questions. First, I didn't understand in the beginning when you said, when you described the purpose of the BDS as if that was your opinion, or this is how you perceive them, how they perceive themselves as a movement. What I want to stress that in Israel there's a larger group that believes that the BDS is basically an anti-Semitic movement, which is one aim it is to annihilate the state of Israel, period. All the rest is BS, it's just excuses. Second, you mentioned that the BDS was formed in Ramallah by Palestinians. I think the BDS could not have been so successful if it not had the help of left-wing Israelis who would contribute from their insights how to work things about and how to influence people both in the Western world and in Israel. Third point, with respect to your analysis, what I think was missing, this is not my topic of study, but it was clear to me, is the whole subject of internal Israeli politics, which I think plays a big role
in what is going on with how to approach the BDS problem, let's put it this way. So this was missing from the lecture. I think this is a big link that should be added there. And final point, since you were so much worried about the soccer, then I just want to let you know, in case you don't know, that, what is his name? Jibril Rajoub, yes, he was removed from office for 1 year by the International Soccer Association. So in some way, the anti-BDS movement has also some small, maybe insignificant victories, but they're symbolic nonetheless. And to Corinne, I want to say first, it was very interesting, the point of view. As I said, one should not look for logic or reason within the BDS. So, in that term, all the LGBT movement as well as the women's rights movement is the same. We didn't mention that article who said that Israeli soldiers do not rape Palestinian women, and this was a demonstration for their biased views against Palestinians and racism. And to Zev, I just want to say it was very interesting what you said. I think that it took you so long in your presentation to get the most important point, which got lost on the way, and which is the most critical in this discussion, in this, the fact that BDS today does not have much influence on Israel or Israel's security, but it will be in the future if nothing else is made to do.
Right.
So this is thank you.
Thank you. Just one more question. Just one, please.
Thank you so much for
But only one.
Okay.
Thanks.
For a brief question, I think
Or very brief comment.
I would like to hear anything about connection, any relation of Hamas and BDS or Hezbollah, some organization like this, if it exists, because as I know, it's BDS cooperates very good with Ramallah, with Fatah government as well. But if you come somewhere in the West Bank, you see a lot of goods, Israeli goods in all shops. So how it looks like with Hamas and Hezbollah?
Okay, starting with yours. BDS is designed to appeal to those areas of thinking and study that value very much liberal ideas of human rights. Also those areas where people are interested very much in what's happening in the Middle East. Also those areas where Palestinian activism has been most successful. So BDS started off targeting Western Europe and the US. And because BDS activists perceive that the values that they're appealing to are most entrenched in those places, and also the states whose populations these are the most powerful. I don't know how, the short answer to your question is that I don't know the state of BDS on continental Europe, so I'd have to think about that. Your whole variety of questions, I'm going to pick out something that I think is important, and I can illustrate this. Someone I know who will remain nameless went along to a major meeting of BDS, and she asked a question of the leaders of the movement and said, are we in the BDS, are we in favour of one state, two states, or no state? And the organizer of the event stood up and turned to the panel and said, nobody must answer this question. So Fran stood up and said, what do you mean nobody answered the question? she said, I'm in favour of boycotting the settlements, but not boycotting Israel. What's the position of the movement? The arrangement, the guy running the things said, we don't answer this. This is a distraction. This is a distraction. There is the power of the BDS is in its narrative of Israeli wrongdoing. So when you say what's the purpose of BDS, the purpose of BDS is to get everybody together under a sort of broad idea to attack the state of Israel. Okay, so it hasn't got any easily achievable things, and it hasn't achieved very much, and it won't achieve very much. What concerns me is what I perceive to be a political overreaction of Israel in reacting to this. And the final point on this is that I don't think that discussing this in terms of anti-Semitism necessarily helps. And also, I was planning a little bit because I was trying to remember the point that really woke me up over what you said. What woke me up over what you said was, we in Israel, we have these NGOs. They go, there would be no BDS without Israeli NGOs. There would be no BDS without Israeli leftists. There would be no BDS without human rights. I went to a presentation by Gerald Steinberg. You know Gerald Steinberg, NGO Watch, absolutely your point of view. The greatest threat to the state of Israel at the moment is human rights law. What? So what are you saying? Are you saying that the leftists in Israel should be strung up from lampposts so that we can attack, so that we can prevent BDS?
Gerald never said that. He never said that.
Were you at the conference in London? Were you there?
You were there.
I was there. I was there. You weren't there. I was there, and I stood up and said, "What are you talking about?" And I responded to him from the floor at the discussion. This is the danger, when you have a little pinprick, which is what BDS is, just be careful not to overreact and hit your arm so hard that you get a bruise.
BDS and Eastern Europe.
BDS and Eastern Europe, BDS and Hamas you asked about.
Yes, I did, yeah.
When you missed the beginning of my presentation, I dealt with that at the beginning.
Corinne.
May I? Although I think there is a strong element of anti-Semitism in BDS, I don't think that's a reason to lay down, roll over, and die. I think that you can reduce anti-Semitic animus by becoming, as Alan has suggested, more liberal and giving your enemies less occasion to critique you. Being able to come back at them with a peace agreement or greater liberalization of your society and so on and so on. These are powerful. As for Hamas, they understand BDS very well. They have a very well-developed public relations campaign. They know that they are never going to win a military action against Israel. What they do is try to make Israel look really bad on the international stage through the news stations and coverage of Israeli action, of defensive action against Hamas rocket attacks in Israel.
In addition to what Corinne said, we don't have an open evidence concerning the interrelation between the BDS movement and Hamas and Hezbollah, besides the funds that come to both the so-called as-if NGO or as-if human rights organizations involved into the BDS and extremist Islamist institutions and organizations are quite often come from the same sources.
Any comments on the Eastern Europe?
I missed the question.
Could you please repeat your question?
Oh, sorry, I missed your question. What was your question on Eastern Europe?
I asked about possibility of widespread BDS
oh,
in continental Europe, especially in Germany, countries and France.
But Germany, France, not Eastern.
No, I didn't.
Continental Europe.
I didn't have the data. I don't have the data for that. It's, if you give me an email, I'll look into that and I'll answer that later on. But at the moment, I don't know everything, and that's something I don't know.
Okay, we'll do it next time.
Yes.
We'll speak about Eastern Europe.
Exactly.
So if I can make one final comment, if Eastern Europe gets really good at protecting LGBT rights, it will probably become anti-Zionist.
In Eastern Europe, BDS movement doesn't exist.
Exactly.
Yeah, but
Israel,
I don't know anything about Germany and Austria.
Israel has increasingly a great deal in common with Eastern Europe.
Germany
that's
is
what
not
it
a
was
part
born.
of Eastern Europe.
Exactly.
Okay, so thank you so much for the presentation. I'm
Yeah,
sorry,
still
sir.
continue,
There's a
still
camera
continue.
behind you. There's a camera behind you. And so, since this was the last panel of this conference, I would like to express from myself and from the Ukrainian Association for Jewish Studies, I would like to express gratitude to all speakers. Thank you for coming to this conference. There were extremely interesting lectures on so diverse topics, and we hope there will be future for Israel studies in Ukraine and also in Poland. I would like to say special thanks to those who assisted to organize this conference. Thank you, Dr. Hirik, Sergei. Thank you, MA program in Jewish Studies at Kid Middle Academy, and special thanks to the coordinator of the program, Lana, Svetlana. Thank you. Thank you, Alexandra, for taking pictures and no. That's not the end. Next year. So, and Alexandra will be the tour guide tomorrow. So, for those who join the tour, Alexandra. Alexandra will wait for you in the lobby at 9. Okay, so other special thanks go to Nadia. And to Valeria. And to Darina. Someone else?
Yourself.
Thank you.